What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. He is Christopher Carter. I'm Noah Hiles, and we are your Pitt beat reporters here at the PG. Chris, an uneventful weekend, a bye week. It was supposed to be simple, but then Jim Boeheim spoke to the media, and it got very hectic. We didn't really field any questions on the Boeheim stuff, but I think we should open just talking about it, giving our reaction from it. You can watch our initial reaction and analysis of it on North Shore Drive, which is also on the YouTube channel. You can find it anywhere you would find this type of content that we do. But Chris, just real quick for people, the rare group of people who watch this and not North Shore Drive, what's your reaction to the fallout that came from Boeheim's comments?
I just think it was ridiculous for him to say in the first place. Jeff Capel, of course, wasn't going to speak much on Jim Boeheim's comments himself. He's just like, you have your opinion, however you want to have your opinion. But he did point out when we asked him the question about, excuse me, what would you say, what went into, was NIL part of recruiting this team? And specifically, the three veterans that have kind of carried the team this year, Greg Elliott, Blake Hinson, and Nelly Cummings. And he said, well, Blake Hinson didn't play basketball for 2 years. Nelly Cummings went to Colgate, and Greg Elliott didn't even start at Marquette. So no.
Yeah.
And it goes to what we were saying on the North Shore Drive, but most people were picking Pitt to finish last or next to last in the ACC. It would be different if Pitt just all of a sudden went and got a whole bunch of superstars and they changed overnight. Like there was a couple years ago, they had a 5-star center who was really close. It was between them and Florida. And then the last minute, Pitt thought they had him, and then he flipped to Florida, and everyone was like, oh, man. But, if Pitt got a guy like that, I get it. I'd be like, okay, there might be some questions to be asked. But that didn't even happen here. They're just winning basketball games because this team has come together really well. They're well coached. They're playing together. There's good chemistry, and they're winning basketball games. And now they're being thrown into this mix. And Jim Boeheim did retract his statement, and he said he wouldn't get more into that. But bottom line, to me, this sounded like sour grapes. Jim Boeheim, he's 78 years old. He's a national champion, and now he's one of the teams that's getting beat up consistently in the ACC, and he's not having a good time.
Yeah, it's just, I agree with everything you said. I mean, this guy was frustrated. He's frustrated that his team can't get off the bubble, and not just this year, but just every year since really joining the ACC. And granted, Syracuse has had some nice tournament runs since joining the ACC. It's had some success in March. I think primarily because it's a tough matchup by the way it plays against unfamiliar opponents. But nonetheless, I mean, it's had some success, but Syracuse is used to being a power. And when it was at its height, it was a power in the toughest conference in all of college basketball. It was up there with the Georgetowns and the Villanovas and UConn and wherever. And it's just not that anymore. It's a lot of, remember when we had Carmelo Anthony, remember when we had Jerry McNamara, and hey, we still play 2-3 zone, and we still have the same coach from when Jimmy Carter was president. And that's what the program is right now. And he's frustrated. I think he does feel external pressure, even though in that story he said, oh, everyone I talk to wants me here. Well, you must not talk to a lot of people then, because a lot of people want Jim Boeheim gone, and for good reason. I think the game's kind of starting to pass him by a little bit. The sport certainly is, by the way you go about acquiring talent for your team. And yeah, he misspoke out of frustration. It is what it is. No need to really go super further into it, because we reported on it now for a lot. So we'll just move on. We'll answer some questions. Alex starts us off by asking, at the end of the year, how much will Pitt's out-of-conference beginning of season schedule results hurt their chances of getting a bid/seeding? Not often you see a team at the top of their league standings be projected as a 9-10 seed. Well, Alex, I'll start this off by saying it depends on how Pitt finishes. If Pitt finishes in the top 3 spots of the ACC in the regular season, it's not going to be on the bubble. I don't care, how shaky the rest of the conference is. If Pitt's, in second place in the ACC ahead of teams like Miami or Virginia or whoever, it's just not going to be on the bubble, and it might not be a 9 or 10 seed. It still might be a 7 seed, and if it wins the ACC or makes a deep tournament run, might be a 6 seed. But I do think that Pitt is starting to get some recognition now. I don't think Pitt, as we're recording this, is on the bubble. That could change with a bad loss, but right now I think Pitt is safe, and if it continues at its pace, it's not going to have the sweat making the tournament. I think right now Pitt's biggest focus is competing to win the ACC in the regular season, and that's a distinct possibility based on its weak schedule of remaining 8 games. So yeah, I think the key is you don't have to worry about seeding or anything if it just keeps winning, which it should be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the things that we've seen so far with the rankings have been impacted by the out of conference and the start to the season. But as far as like where they could go after the season, if Pitt handles its business, it could very well win the ACC, or at least position themselves as the 2 seed or the 3 seed in the ACC tournament, which would give them a couple buys and then give them a chance to beat some teams that are very beatable, and then only have to win a couple games against really good opponents to be in the ACC championship, and then everyone's talking about them in a lot different of a light. So there's a lot of avenues that Pitt would have this year to making it so that beginning of the season doesn't impact their seeding as much. I think that the stigma will still stick with them. I think that if they finish with 22 wins and they maybe win a game or two in the conference tournament, I think you could see them be a team that gets that doesn't get like a high seed or anything like that. They'll get like a middle seed, but I think that they'll certainly be above like a 9 seed by that point. I think that they would be able to climb up maybe to like the 6 seed area, part of it. But a lot of it depends on image and stuff too, because people have talked about the ACC and their conference standing as a whole. I just think that if Pitt does what we're saying here, they handle business against these bad teams that they're going to play, and it can at least beat Miami again, or make sure they beat Virginia Tech. I think that they're going to be in a really strong spot to have a good seed in the tournament.
And to build off of that, I mean, JK wants to know. I don't know if it's JK Rowling or JK Simmons, but I know for a fact both of them watch this show here, so I appreciate both of their viewership.
They told me themselves.
The woman who made Harry Potter and the man who starred in Whiplash, among other great films. But both of them will want to know any thoughts on what the aversion is to Pitt in the AP Top 25 voting. The last 6+ years, the loss against Florida State, the ACC being down this year. JK can't figure it out. JK, I'll make it real simple. I mean, I get it. Pitt fans have been paying attention. They're excited. This team has showed the ability to beat teams in the top 25. They feel that it deserves to be in the top 25. I don't necessarily disagree. I don't have a vote in the AP top 25. I'd probably put Pitt in the top 25, but you've got to look at the progress. Last week, this team had 9 points in the voting. Only 3 of all the voters in the country felt that Pitt was top 25 worthy. It's got a lot more recognition. It has 26 points in this week's poll, which puts it at number 30 in the country. There are only 4 teams ahead of it in line to get in, which means if it just keeps winning, it's going to be in there. If it goes undefeated this week against Louisville and on the road against Florida State, and next week I believe it plays Boston College and then on the road against Virginia Tech, I mean, if it goes 4-0 in those 4 games, I have no doubt Pitt's going to be in the top 20. There's a good chance Pitt's on a course to be ranked. People are starting to give Pitt its flowers, its respect, maybe not as fast as people who've been really paying close attention that cover the ACC or just basketball fans in Western Pennsylvania would like to see. But overall, things are trending in the right direction. I don't think Pitt is nearly as disrespected as it once was not too long ago.
No, yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think especially because you look around and you see, I think I said this before, when they were about to go on the stretch where they had to beat when they lost to Florida State, I was like, if they could have won that game, I think they might be ranked right now, because then that would have been a bad loss. It's off their record. They'd be 17-6. And then I think they would edge out other teams. Now, like, I do think that there are some teams that I get why Pitt fans could be upset about, maybe a Rutgers that also is 16-7, maybe a Creighton at 15-8, maybe a Providence at 17-6. But there's a lot of Big 12 teams up in there that, like Baylor's 17-6, Baylor's 17-6 in the Big 12, where
Right.
there's a lot of big dogs that they're going up against all the time, and they're finding ways to beat tough opponents week in and week out. Same thing for TCU.
Same thing
It's
for
also
Creighton
17-6.
in the Big East. The Big East is loaded this year, and Creighton played a really difficult non-conference schedule. So Big East and Big 12 teams are going to get priority over the ACC. That's just how it's going to work this year.
No, I get
Yeah.
that. And again, I think part of it, but to be honest, I do think part of it is, part of it is the Pitt's past and how that's played into things. Because I've talked to voters and they've been like, yeah, I'm just waiting for them to flop like they have in the past couple of years and in the past several years. And I get it. If why am I putting stock behind a team that has, there's been a couple times when everyone thought Pitt was about to do it, and then they just had an utter collapse, and a couple times under Capel. But I think this team's different. They just have to prove that they are different, and then they'll get the votes.
Another thing as we transition here is, the win that would have lifted. Pitt played one game last week, and it was a nice win. It's on the road against North Carolina. But the thing is, North Carolina is not that good this year, or at least it has a ton of talent, but it didn't get one vote in this AP poll. It's working its way toward the bubble. So while that win is big and it carries that brand name, which we're going to get into now, it's not a top 25 win on the road. But on that note, Tom wants to know, will programs with bigger names like Duke and North Carolina gain priority over Pitt for NCAA tournament seeding based off of their name and big brand? I don't think that that's out of the line of questioning. I think that that's a very good question and certainly in the realm of possibility. Chris, what about you?
I think Duke, especially because Duke's beaten Pitt.
Yeah.
I do call me being a little too hopeful, but I do think that if let's say North Carolina and Pitt finish the year, North Carolina's what, 7-5 in the Big East, Pitt's 9-3, North Carolina's 15-8 to Pitt's 16-7. So like full season, overall record, they're very close. Pitt's got a 2-game lead on the conference schedule, but let's say they finish at the same point. They finish with the same wins and losses. They get to the same part of the conference tournament, but they don't play each other again. I would like to think that people would look at what Pitt did this year and how they swept North Carolina and say, like, you know what? They go above. Now, Duke, it's harder to say. Duke, has one game up overall on Pitt, one game behind them in the conference, and they've beaten Pitt. So there's more back and forth there. But I think North Carolina is a team where specifically they should not get over Pitt. And I think that voters would, or seating and how that would work out, that would protect Pitt in that instance. Even in the net rankings that are specifically, numbers related to a formula, Pitt jumped up to 55 this week. They were, in the 60s for the longest there, but North Carolina's 44. That is purely mathematics and just how that formula is constructed. I think that if someone was making that list, Pitt would be ahead of North Carolina right now.
Chris, Duke has 2 wins over ranked teams this year. One of them is at home against Miami. Pitt also beat Miami at home when it was ranked. The other was at a neutral court against Ohio State, who has a losing record right now.
Very true.
So you can make the argument, and granted, one of Duke's best win of the season is against Xavier, and it was before Xavier was ranked, but now that's the best win on its resume. Miami's another good win, but top 2-3 wins Duke has had this year was at home over Pitt. That's the resume boost where Pitt can point to, even if Pitt beat Duke on the road, Pitt still has 3 much better victories compared to beating Duke at a non-ranked Duke team at Cameron Indoor Stadium. And I do think that the notoriety that comes with a North Carolina or a Duke, just based on the fact that these teams always get the 5 stars. These teams were both in the Final Four last year. They were highly ranked at the start of the season. You talk about that believability factor, the legitimacy where people are waiting for Pitt to fall off. Everyone in the country is watching Duke and North Carolina right now, waiting for them to wake up. especially based on what North Carolina did last year, where right around this time, after Pitt went in to the Dean Dome and upset them, North Carolina got its stuff together and it went all the way to the national title game. And I think a lot of people are waiting for that to happen again. So I think if Duke and North Carolina, if either one of those programs finishes strong in the regular season and they both finish right around where Pitt is in the conference standings and they go right around where Pitt finishes in the ACC tournament, they both will get the edge over the Panthers simply because of reputation. I don't think – I think one, if it comes down to one getting the final 6 seed and another getting the final 7 seed, I think we know who's going to get that 6 seed just based off of reputation is going to provide that little edge at the
Even
end.
North Carolina, who Pitt swept.
Yeah, I mean, that's a team that still started the year number one in the country. And North Carolina has a lot of opportunities to beat really good teams at the end of the season as opposed to Pitt that doesn't have a lot of challenges. So I think just national exposure matters, man. When North Carolina's playing on ESPN while Pitt's playing on the ACC network, that makes a difference as far as national opinion. And those are the people who decide seeding. I'm not saying that it will strictly come down to that. If Pitt's significantly better, then yeah, Pitt will get the advantage. But I think that could be a tiebreaker for sure.
Leave no doubt.
Yeah. You make sure they remember the night they played the Panthers. Eileen wants to know, we're going to switch over to women's basketball. Pitt Women's Hoops is winless in the ACC this year so far. Well, did they win a game in ACC play this year, Carter?
They did. They just won their first one when they pinked out.
This weekend, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this weekend, Pitt Women's Hoops got its first ACC win, but still another tough season under head coach Lance White. Eileen says the AD can't be happy with the lack of progress. Any change looming there? Carter, your take.
I have to say, I don't see why there wouldn't be. The last coach, Susan McConnell-Serio, she lasted 5 years. She actually got to an NCAA tournament in the second round by her second year. And then she finished 2-14 in her last year. Right now, Lance White, conference records for Lance White, 2-14 his first year, 1-17 his second year, 3-12 his third year, 2-16 his fourth year, and now he's in his fifth year, and they're 1-11, maybe lucky to get to 2-16 again. I think that 5 years is plenty of time. Now, I will say this. I can only imagine that it's tough to start your recruiting, and then by your second year, you're hit with the pandemic, and then you've got to find answers and rebuild an entire program while recruitment is extremely limited. Jeff Capel has gone through a lot of that himself. So maybe some of that grace is granted. But I mean, you look at what Pitt's been doing in men and women's soccer. You look at Pitt football. You look at Pitt men's basketball. Heck, look at what Pitt wrestling's doing right now. They're having a really good time. I think that Lance White might find himself in a tough position. Maybe a little bit unfair with the stuff that he's had to go through. But I think that Pitt can look at 5 years of being in the bottom of the ACC as okay. That was enough.
Yeah, Heather, I will say, I mean, she's very big on program stability. She made her hires, and she sticks by the people that she brought in for the most part. She gives them the opportunity to really take the time to build something. And, Narduzzi's had down years, and that wasn't a Heather-like hire, but, she stuck with him through those down years. Obviously, Capel had his struggles since being hired. But there's got to be some sign of progress, and there doesn't look to be any sign of progress with Pitt women's basketball, unfortunately. I mean, the guy's 9-70 in ACC play in his 5 seasons. That's tough. It's tough to justify bringing him back. I will say Lance White, very nice guy in the small interactions that I've had with him. I would love to see him turn things around and bring absolutely. Pittsburgh another winning program, and that would be fun to cover. But as of right now, it's hard to state a case as to why he should be back. Don't have any inside information or anything, but you can't imagine that Heather would be pleased with where that program is. We move on now to our final question. Nate wants to know, realignment talk has quieted down for a bit, thank goodness. Going into the offseason, where does Pitt stand now compared to the start of the season? That's actually very interesting because I recall this summer when the big news happened in Ohio State, or not Ohio State, USC and UCLA announced that they were going to the Big Ten. And, prior to that, it was Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. There was this major talk of two power conferences really ruling the landscape of college sports, especially in basketball and football, and how there might just be those two power programs or power conferences and everybody else. And if they're going to add a couple of teams elsewhere from the ACC, from the Big 12, from the Big East, or wherever else, who gets in? And does Pitt get that invite? And I think in the summertime, I don't know if Pitt would have been getting that invite, but based on what Pitt Athletics has shown this year, building off of an ACC championship in football to finish the season ranked and win a notable bowl game with another 9-win season, shows the football team's trending upward. Basketball is incredible turnaround. And then 2 Olympic sports make Final Fours. I think it finished in the top 10 in the College Cup standings, the highest in school history.
Number 6, actually.
Number 6, yes, exactly. So it's a good athletic department. Now, will it be a lucrative athletic department? Does Pitt bring the crowds and the eyeballs that another program available from maybe like an Oklahoma State or something from the Big 12 would? I don't know. But I think that Pitt has gained ground in that conversation if that ever becomes reality. Would you agree with that, Chris?
I think that they certainly gained ground. Something that I still hold on to that I was saying when all these talks were started, I think that either one of these mega conferences could truly benefit from just making from Pitt. And it's funny enough, rivalries matter, and I think that rivalries are extremely important and they're moneymakers in college sports. Pitt and West Virginia teaming up and be like, yo, who wants both of us? Mm-hmm. Because it's ridiculous that they've had to organize to kind of be in the same schedule, when they're so close to each other. I think that these are two teams that need to be playing each other every year. And I think that if they were collectively, West Virginia with their history, Pitt with their recent success, and the historic battles of the backyard brawl, I think that they could package it and be like, hey, what if you brought both these programs into a conference? You'd guarantee this rivalry every year as something to watch, and both of these athletic programs can be competitive in major sports and give you really good games and give you good eyeballs on the situation. I think that Pitt has absolutely gained ground in that conversation. And if West Virginia wanted to be in that conversation, I think the two tying themselves to each other and being like, hey, let's pitch this, I think that would be a bonus there, because as much as talent and everything does matter, what sells is rivalries. And when you get the SEC, that's one of the reasons the SEC is so powerful, is because when those teams play against each other, it is war. It is just the hatred, the familiarity. It's all part of it. The same things go with the biggest battles in the Big Ten. I think the ACC, it's tough because there's a lot of teams in the ACC that weren't always in the ACC. And there's your basketball ones like Duke and North Carolina. But Clemson in football.
I think that's a great point you made, Chris, because if you look at this realignment stuff, it's happening through rivalry pairs. It's UCLA and USC going together. It's Oklahoma and Texas going together. When Duke and North Carolina, if they were to ever leave the ACC,
they'd be going together.
Yeah, they're not going apart. There's no chance. So, I think that that's a very valid point, that Pitt and West Virginia, while not on the same tier as those rivalries that we just listed,
right,
there is value. And both of those schools have solid athletic programs. So I think that's all we got for today. Chris, any final thoughts?
I'm very interested to see, as I always say, I'm very interested to see how packed the Pete gets. Marquez Williams tweeted out that the whole football team is showing up for Pitt Louisville Tuesday night. We'll be there. Will you? If you are, come by the press box and say hello. We're friendly guys. We like to say hi to our fans.
Yeah, just don't ask me about my conversation I had with Jim Boeheim, because I'm going to keep that between me and him, okay? Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Follow us on social media and keep tuning in. We'll have more content here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.